Hey everyone, it's JT and welcome back to another episode of JT Talks Jobs. This is the show where we teach you everything you need to know about job search and career growth because school taught you everything except how to do those things. So I am really excited today to have a special guest. For those of you that have been following me the last couple of weeks, I have been talking nonstop about the new book, It Takes What It Takes by Trevor Moawad. And I'm so excited. I basically stalked him on LinkedIn and was able to get a hold of his team and get him on the show live here today, which is going to be great. Why am I doing this? Because I think his book, which is brand new and just came out, be sure to click the link. I've listened to it over 3 times now on Audible, but you can get it in print form too. And it talks about this concept of neutral thinking. And we're going to get really deep into that subject today. I think it's extremely timely in times of crisis and uncertainty to understand this concept. And so what better than to bring on the person that wrote the book on it, literally. So with that in mind, I'm going to bring him up on the screen. Hey, Trevor, welcome to the show.
JT, great to be here today.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on. This is such an important and timely topic as we were talking about. So I want to get right down to it. You are a mental conditioning coach. I thought you were a performance coach, but mental conditioning. Talk us through what that is exactly.
You know what? The numerology as it relates to sports psychology consultant, mental coach, life coach, peak performance educator, performance specialist. It's kind of all over the place depending on what discipline you really focus in. The sports world has chosen to use mental conditioning as a partner of strength and conditioning or physical conditioning. But essentially, the key focus is helping people maximize the human asset, which more than anything is your mind.
That makes sense. And so much of the book, I follow sports, but I'm not, a sports diehard, but you got me so intrigued in reading the book because I just didn't understand to the degree that these pro athletes are looking at the mental aspect of the game. It really does seem as much mental as physical. So you got to tell me though, how did you get into this field? Because it's not a common field.
Well, no. And I think, it's interesting if you read the book or you kind of look at my track record, just the colleges and the places I've been, and I think I've been able. I don't know if I went back 20 years and was talking to myself in my early 20s. I don't know that I would tell myself to go into this field, although it has been better than the $800 I was making a month playing soccer with lawn chairs in my house. But it really, truthfully, JT, isn't a field that's grown. I think we've seen some growth in the business world, but in sports, while a handful of us, I would say maybe 3 or 4 of us in the United States have found relevance with the Yankees, the Cowboys, the Dolphins, Alabama, Georgia, some of those big places. It isn't an industry that's really grown. I don't think there's a lot of talent in it. I don't think there's a lot of if you go to Harvard to study sports psychology, if they even have a program, they're not going to have a professor who was able to work with the same types of people he would have been if he's an orthopedist. So that, it leaves a lot of gray area for the consumer. I think that's been a unique challenge. I've been fortunate because I've been with forward-thinking leaders. Nick Saban, whether you follow football or not, he was Forbes' 11th best leader in the world 2 years ago. And people, I don't know why a football coach would be a great leader, but, it is. And sports mean a lot to people, particularly now when nobody can watch them. So really you need leadership that has a philosophy based on an aggregate of marginal gains, that we're going to aggregate marginal gains throughout our organization, physically, mentally, psychologically, spiritually, psychogenically. And then we're going to apply resources to help our people get better. So I got into it, unwittingly at 4 years old when my parents started me with psycho-cybernetics, visualization, imagery, affirmations. My dad in the mid-'70s left teaching and coaching and became a full-time peak performance educator working with Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, Pepsi, AT&T, NASA, and was a really probably about 10, 15 years ahead of a Tony Robbins, probably marketed himself a little bit differently, but Tony is obviously incredibly successful. But my dad, before he passed away, had spoken to over 4 million people, and it was a huge impact. So to be raised in the industry, not so much in sports, but more in the business world. But in the back, I sold his books and went to a lot of his seminars. And so I had the exposure to the industry in the field. I wanted to forge my own path. But, by the late 90s, early 2000s, I was working in sports psychology for the sports agency IMG in Bradenton, Florida, at a 500-acre academy that's kind of like Hogwarts for athletes. And not making more than $28,000 a year, but forging my own path in a very similar field to him. So I think the exposure as a young person to the industry, I think the fact that I was able to relate it to myself, how it would help me academically, athletically, health-wise, as I had different challenges growing up. And then, over the years, I've learned how to be a functional teacher of it. And then most of my friends now are kind of early, mid-40s, and they're all head coaches or military command sergeant majors or operators, just based on the kind of group I've been with. So I've been able to keep jobs because they're all successful.
It's fascinating.
I'll talk to 5 head coaches today that are just friends that, we were in our late 20s, early 30s, and now they coach NFL teams and others. And everybody's trying to figure out how you navigate, March 26, 2020.
I totally get it. And, I always think that sports and executives tend to lead the way in this area. So one of the things we talk about at Work It Daily is that coaching isn't a sign of weakness. It's a path to greatness, right? So for a long time, I think there was almost a stigma. You only went and got help from somebody when there was something going wrong. And what I love about your work is, sure, you're going in and helping people when they're having mental challenges, athletes in particular, but I know you're working with businesses too, but you're also trying to condition people just to build up their ability to do something called neutral thinking, which I want to get to in a minute, because I found that so fascinating in terms of that. But let's talk a little bit more about that. Why do you think now is the time to be teaching this concept around mindset to everybody? Why'd you write the book now?
Well, I wrote the book now, truthfully, because HarperCollins came to us. And it's funny, when HarperCollins reached out and my editor, Shannon Welch, had just finished the book Shoe Dog, which was a great book about Phil Knight, the CEO and founder of Nike. And I literally just didn't believe it was happening. Maria Shriver has been a friend for a long time, the niece of John F. Kennedy. And she had really encouraged me. She had tracked me down, and then we went and met in LA, and I met with about her and 10 female workers. It was like a power meeting. It was really intimidating. And but she said, instead of 150 athletes, I have a voice should be speaking to 150 million people. And that was the first time I'd ever really heard that. And I didn't really know. It's interesting, JT, because when you work in the sports world, this is where I think I'm so much different than an Ed Milet or a Grant Cardone or a Gary Vaynerchuk or a Tony Robbins. The sports world, it's almost as if when you work in that world, you're kind of lucky to be a part of it. So you never really feel exceptional when you're working in that world. And so you don't think of yourself as a thought leader, or even if you're in a lot of big games and big moments and appear on TV, etc. So that was a really interesting journey. Well, why would anybody, want to write a book or have me do a book? And so I had to kind of get through that and understand that I had a voice that I think was big enough to share with multiple people. I think Maria Shriver really set that tone. And she challenged me to kind of write a book. So I met with her editors. The process seemed really complicated. And then when HarperCollins came and Harper One Books, they made it really easy. They just said, Russell Wilson, the quarterback from the Seattle Seahawks, he and I had done a TV show together. And they just said, look, we want to tell the story of neutral thinking. Nobody's talked about it. Nobody's really exploring the power of learning how to be less negative. Everybody's still continuing to challenge people to be more positive. You have a different message because you've had a different audience. And so they really helped me find a great ghostwriter. My agent did a great job kind of setting everything up, Alan Zucker. And then the book. So the book was really probably more that they were interested, if that makes sense. And then it was just a 2 or 3 month window of time. We wanted to release it at the Super Bowl to just really go back and think about 44 years of living and what I had been taught and what messages resonated, breaking down the 12 chapters. And while neutral thinking, the illusion of choice, and some of the things that I'm sure we'll discuss today were big. I also went into really the fundamentals of thinking and the basic elements that are core tenets of sports psychology, mental conditioning, and peak performance education.
So that's the thing that I loved. And because obviously I read a ton of these types of books, I get pitched them all the time. And I tend to find that there's maybe one decent chapter, just going to call it out, and the rest of it is sort of fluff. And what I found as I was listening to yours was exactly what you said. You could tell that you've had your head down doing your craft for so long, because I found something chapter after chapter that was important. And it hit in such a timely fashion because of the neutral thinking concept. So you alluded to that. And let me just talk to everyone about this.
Sure.
This idea that we just can't go from negative to positive hit me between the eyeballs, because it's so true. And you gave this analogy in the book that, all right, if you're driving a car in full reverse, you don't just drive forward. There has to be this phase of neutral. And I agree. I mean, I like to be a positive person, but I can't sit and tell somebody when a lot of things aren't going their way to just be happy and to have gratitude and be positive. There is this middle step, and you are the first person to just call it out and talk about it. So tell us a little bit more about that and how that really started to come into focus for you.
Yeah, I mean, well, part of it's gainful employment. And I know people who follow workatdaily.com want to understand that, right? And you don't have a chance in the high-end sports world of surviving, with all due respect to John Gordon and, all those guys that make a lot more money than me, and they've been a lot more successful relative to, I think, the consumer-facing element for now, right? For now. But that message, if you're going to be embedded, right? Not if you're coming in for 60 minutes one time during training camp, but if you're going to be embedded in an organization with 85 athletes, where 85% are from single parent backgrounds and 60% come from families below the poverty line, you're not going to live with the power of positive thinking, or mindfulness. I was on a conference call yesterday, and one of our psychologists was talking about, there was some live webinar, some people exploring mindfulness. Mindfulness isn't, well, I believe it, and you've read the book multiple times. We go through imagery, meditation, visualization in the book. We don't do it till the very end, after a lot of critical principles are established. I don't think meditation should be at the forefront of peak performance education or sports psychology right now. It's probably the most complicated skill. And if you start with the complicated, people will quit. And that's what I hate about the industry right now. The industry is only for smart people. And that's why I'm glad that I'm not one of those people, because I've been able to be a little bit more plain spoken. So to go back, we built a message that was relevant. And over a period of time, I started to understand, and Coach Saban wanted me to make something that made sense to all our coaches, all our players, that learning how to be less negative, and this idea that I found through children's books of non-negativity, originally, before I got to neutral, was a lot more powerful than trying to make people be more positive. And the analogy I read in a children's book was, imagine you're running a race, and on the left side you have 1,000 people cheering for you. That's positive thinking. On the right side you have 1,000 people booing. That's negative. If you learn how to just lessen the booing, you don't need to increase the cheering. And that really resonated for me. And so how do you help an organization lessen the booing? Well, you start to learn, well, where is the booing coming from? Well, our language, our musical consumption, our TV consumption, who we're surrounding ourselves with. I mean, these areas that are really controllable, that really make sense to me. And our players resonated. They don't want to be negative. They don't know anything about really positive thinking working one way or the other, but they know that negative thinking works. They don't want to be that way. We got a lot of bright kids. But they also don't want to be told to be positive when it's 104 degrees and it's the third practice. So eventually, like you talked about, we said if you're going backwards, you eventually got to slow down and get to neutral. And basically at neutral, you can make a decision. I'm going to do what I was just doing and go backwards again, or I'm going to make a decision to change my behavior and start to go forwards. And I think that that's a powerful way to live and a way to look at it. And our players, Russell Wilson, Jake Fromm, Kirby Smart, Jimbo Fisher, U.S. Army Special Operation Command, a lot of those guys, Captain Tom Shabey, former commander of SEAL Team 5, they're fluent in the words neutral and what it means to stay neutral and how to get to neutral. And that's something that they can talk to a lot about more than being positive. And right now, negativity is not helping us. And the idea of getting to neutral, I think, makes more sense. I think the timing of the book's been incredible. But I loved, when Demetrius, who I work with, said that we were going to jump on the phone. Then obviously Sean, who's been staying out here, we're doing digital work, went on, and we saw the audience you have and the high engagement you have. It was great because I talk to athletes and coaches all the time, but the message is not for athletes and coaches. I think it's ubiquitous.
You know what? I'm so glad you said that. It's another reason why I love this is I really believe no nonsense. I don't think that you articulated it so well. You're not trying to dumb anything down. You just recognize that if you can't get people through the beginning, they're not going to get to the next level stuff. So this idea of a negativity diet was one of the first things that I locked into that you talk about. Can you expand on that, Samar, as sort of the first step in improving your mindset in times like these?
Yeah. Look, one of the things I learned from this great nutritionist at Alabama, Amy Bragg, was before you can learn how to eat good, you have to not eat bad. Mm-hmm. And so one of the goals, if you're an athlete, is any place that you can drive up and order food from, that's the first thing we stop. Doesn't mean that you can't go to Subway or Which or a sandwich place or whatever and still get something. But by giving up that level of convenience, you're not going to necessarily eat better. You're just going to eat less worse. And I think that the idea of learning how to be less negative, it's just, and I think also I encourage people to look up Christine Porath from she's a teacher at Georgetown. And there's so many, if you just Google the power of negativity, the data is so clear. And then you Google the power of positivity, it's so much more anecdotal. It doesn't mean, my dad used to always say, look, I don't know that positive thinking works, but I know that negative thinking does, and it works negatively. So if it's a risk equation, I'm going to be on the other side. I agree with that. It was just hard for me growing up to be positive, but I didn't want to be negative. So I think that we're at Limitless Minds, and what Russell and I started thinking about of taking to the corporate world, based upon really largely what Maria Shriver had said, was how to help people. Like mindfulness is, Headspace is $1 billion valuation, JT. I mean, these things are blowing up, and I can't meditate unless it's the very end of church, and I can do it for 10 minutes, and 30 minutes later, I'm in my own head. So because I might be listening to the radio, let's say I meditate in the morning, then I finish meditating, and I go to CNN for 4 hours. Like, if I don't watch CNN, I'm not telling you what to do or not to do, but I minimize my negativity inputs and my external negativity, plus I add headspace and meditation and a clear mind. Then you're talking about triple threat.
I so agree with you. I know I loved your negativity diet. I also love the story of you testing your theory on yourself and lasting, I think it was, did you last 26 days with massive amounts of
26 days, yeah, and then I caved.
And then you caved. And it's so, folks, you've got to read this. If you read nothing else, that part of the book is amazing. But, and I'm with you on this, and we're going to have a lot of country music fans get super sad right now. But talk me through about that.
Me country music. By the way, Garth Brooks came out and confronted me, and I went on a couple country stations, and I had a blast because I'll let you tell the story, but I did the interview, and it was like one of 10 things we talked about, and it just blew up across the country nation, particularly with my connections to Georgia and Alabama, and I was just getting killed.
Oh, but I get it, though. And come on, folks, we have to own to it. Even though the songs are so catchy and you love listening to them, so much of the lyrics are negative. And to your point, we're listening to negativity. And I want to hit on some numbers because I'm a total numbers nerd, and you bring this up in the book. So when we think negative thoughts, they're 4 to 7 times more powerful, right? You mentioned
a multiple of 4 to 7 times.
Multiple 4 to 7 times, but that's just in our head. So when we actually say something out loud, it's then times 10.
It's a factor of 10.
Yeah. So you sit there and think, when you heard that old phrase, if you can't say anything nice, don't say it at all. We know where that's coming from, right? There's definitely a proven impact when people think and then talk negatively.
Right. And the book goes into it, but it just goes, for nobody's fault, just goes back to hard wiring. Mm-hmm. You know, we were wired 10,000 years ago to fight or flight because, you know, you walk outside, you're out in the caves, you're out on wherever you're at. If you're not careful, I mean, you could be eaten by a dinosaur. I mean, there was just, you know, you could fall off a cliff, fires, all those different elements. Well, I think now, so you had to almost assume the worst, be prepared for the worst, and if something good happened, great. And so we were wired that way. And I think that what we saw is, and if you were if you know, your consequences for not being optimistic weren't the same as your consequences for not being prepared for the worst. And there's a psychological toll of constantly expecting the worst. It's almost like your cell phone battery starting the day at 40%. You know, like somebody calls you and you're like, oh my God, it's going to be bad. Well, like if you know you can't call them for 7 hours, deal with it in 7 hours. You know, so I think it's one of those things that this idea of neutral is just the past isn't predictive. What happens next is based upon what I do and how I respond. So I think with country music, understanding it's just the 4 to 7 times of the negativity. It's just an input, right? You know, how come all my children look like my best friend? I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy. If I'd have shot you sooner, I'd been out of jail by now. I mean, those are all actual country song titles, and they're true. But they're funny. But if you're not in a good place psychologically, for example, JT, you know, I work for an NBA team, and we were talking about right now consumption of information. And basically a week ago, I've been trying to figure out, like, how do I make sure I know what's going on? So I was like, okay, I'm just going to watch this. I'm going to find out when the press briefing is, and each day on this you know, situation that's happening across the country and the world, and I'll watch that press briefing, get my information only from that. And I watched it 3 days in a row, and it was really, it affected me psychologically, affected how I felt. And then, you know, then I evaluated, like, all right, I can't get my information from that. So I'm going to call the team president of this NBA team every morning, or just get what I need to know. And I think I want to make sure I know the basics. Social distancing, stay in groups of 10. I have some meetings I have every morning at 7 a.m. in Beverly Hills that I got to go. I got to get up at 5:30 and I got to go. So I got to deal with that. But for the most part, know what the truths are, where I can get food, how I can handle things, and then know if they change. And then that's what I need to know. And for me, what's happening in Italy is I don't need to know that. Mm-hmm. So I have to be really careful of what I'm following, social media, etc. But that's how I know myself. Right now, just as different things that I'm going through in my life, my tolerance to handle negativity isn't as strong as it may be at different times. Mm-hmm. So I have to minimize that. You know, like I was doing my temperature every day and doing my blood pressure, like I never do that, you know. And then like I was talking to a friend of mine who's a doctor, and they're like, "Why are you doing that?" You know, I was like, "I don't know," because one day my blood pressure was really high, and like, stop, you don't need to do that. And then like, come in on Monday, and we'll, you know, like, so you learn a little bit, like, because what I was doing was I was like catastrophizing, and then as long as everything was fine, I was fine. But then if my blood pressure was 10 points high, I was a basket case. And I use myself as an example, and I think you know that I do that in the book too. I hate people that write books that try to pretend that they're superheroes. You know, like I am so super flawed. But what I do, and what your audience doesn't know, is I have a bag of ice on my back right now. This morning at 8:15, I'm coming back from that 7 a.m. meeting, and we're in the right lane, just getting onto I-10 West in LA, and then some lady turns going 50 miles per hour, dead right into my SUV. I'm not driving, and we completely hit them. And the car goes to the side, and pop out. Fortunately, everybody was okay. An hour and a half, got the car dropped off, got a new car, got everything, and got back here by 10:30. But I still had a day to complete, right? I want to talk to workatdaily.com. Fortunately, it worked out. But those are the types of things that can derail. But in my mind, I went to neutral. Like, okay, well, first of all, I needed a new car anyways. I didn't really want it now. Everybody walked away, which is great. Yeah, my back's sore, but it's been sorer than this before. I'll ice it. I'll take care of it. I called like a chiropractor to come over today at 3 just to look at it. I called our team doctor with one of the NBA teams. He's like, you don't want to be coming in to the clinic right now. And I said, great, I won't. Just went to the truth, right? Like one thing, because if I would have said, oh my God, it's going to be another one of those days. Well, it's 8:15 a.m., 5 o'clock tonight, JT, I'd say I told you so. Now, I'm not being positive. I'm being, what's the truth? The truth is I walked away, okay? Really big deal for an accident in Southern California. I walked away. Unfortunately, which is really disappointing, but, sometimes people panic like that. The police were great. They started with an attitude of less than pleasant, but I think once they knew we were responsible, we had a really good conversation with them. The paramedics were awesome. How you feeling? Great. Kind of went through some basic things. Do you want to come? I said, man, I feel good. I'll call somebody, have somebody come over. And then the tow truck driver was great. Took the car to Porsche. Porsche was great. Got an Uber. National rental car was great. And we got it all done in an hour and 45 minutes. But my point is, by not panicking, because when it all happened, JT, it was like happening in slow-mo, and my seat was back, so I jerked a little bit, but I was like, I'm okay. I walked away. The car's not okay, but I walked away, and what we want is this to be practical. And for Sean, the 28-year-old videographer that's out here with me, what I wanted him to see was I didn't talk about it. We just handled one step at a time. We got home. That I wanted him to see, 15 years older than him, that I can live these things that you and I talk about.
Yeah. So first of all, that was such a great example. I didn't know if you were going to share with them all that, but I mean, for you to still come on here after being in a car accident today, and you just walk them through exactly what neutral thinking is about, right? Which is just know your truth and stick to your facts.
Right.
I also just want to go back for a second and validate what you said. Another reason why I love the book is you use yourself as an example multiple times throughout. I am with you. I don't know why people think they have to put themselves on a pedestal. If you have something really powerful to say, and I think neutral thinking is powerful, nobody should expect you to be perfect at it. Furthermore, I think we spend our whole lives perfecting it, right? Even if you talk about always getting better in sports, but you can keep getting better. So you might be much higher in neutral thinking, but you're still going to have stuff come your way. You're not always going to react to it the right way, and you're going to catch yourself, and you're going to learn, and you're going to grow, which definitely is throughout your book, which I think is fabulous. So that was an excellent overview of neutral thinking. Now I want to talk about, I don't want to give everything away because I really want everyone to go invest in the book or the audiobook, but I do want to talk about illusion of choice. Can we jump into that a little bit? Because that's another powerful concept that you hit on.
Yeah, I'm going to give my ice to Sean real quick. Take my ice off. With my George Clooney beer. But I wasn't thinking about my apple in my far right corner of my back for the last 20 minutes. This is awesome, JT. For 2014, I was hired by the Memphis Grizzlies, a good team, smaller team in the NBA, obviously in Memphis, Tennessee. And they had a player on their team named Vince Carter. He played a long time. He's 43 years old now. But he was maybe 37, 38 at the time. And he was a huge college football fan, JT. It's not really a sports story, but I was getting ready to go to one of the teams I worked with, and we had a handful of players arrested overnight. And we were just talking about behavior, and he was like, how many guys on that team want to play pro football? I was probably like, maybe 7 out of 10. He's like, isn't it crazy they think that they can kind of get away with or do whatever they want and still play at that level? I said, what do you mean? He's like, well, you can't do whatever you want and play professional sports. I said, what do you mean? Like choice is an illusion? He said, yeah. He said, look, I'm 38 years old playing professional basketball. I don't eat fast food. I work out the day of games. I don't even slam dunk because I can't get back as fast. And he had all like 5 or 6 things he went through that he had to adapt in order to sustain the level and continue to play pro sports at 38. But what I liked about how he communicated it was very objective. You either do it or you don't. Like the information is you can't have it both ways. Like if you want to be really good at something, this is what you do. And there's nothing wrong with not doing it. Just don't expect to be good at it. And I think that relates to parenting. I think that relates to marriage. I think that relates to cohabitation, relationships, business. The idea of, organizations, teams, businesses, individuals, part-time workers, full-time workers, however long this lasts, 4 weeks, 4 months, there are people that will get through this better than other people, by figuring out this, what's going to allow them to be successful and handle it, and as well as they can. And I think that's, the idea of the illusion of choice really comes back to, obviously we have the right to make any choices we want, but it's an illusion if we think we can do anything we want and achieve a specific standard.
I totally agree, right? If you know the goal, then like you're saying, the actions you're going to need to take. And if you don't, you need to figure those out. But once they've been mapped out, there really isn't choice anymore. It's do it or don't, right?
Right, and there's nothing wrong with not doing it. And
sure.
Like I say in the book, the world needs a lot of average people. But I think, average people become average through average behavior, not average aptitude. I mean, as much as you look in the sports world, whether the people who work at daily.com follow it, they know who LeBron James is or different things. Those guys are, physiologically different and they look like transformers. But the vast majority of athletes are not like that. They're gifted, but their behaviors are so ahead of their success. What time they go to bed, how they sleep, what they eat, what they don't eat, what they listen to, what they don't listen to. And so many times the great athletes, what they don't do, not what they do, so I think when you eliminate your margin for error relative to choices, you're better off. But I also think that sometimes as people, we're going to say, well, what if I go to bed at 5? Could I still be good today at 5 in the morning? Like I had a meeting at 7 a.m. and 2 nights ago, I stayed up and watched Netflix, House of Cards till 2 in the morning. And then all day I was a mess. Last night I went to bed at 9. I think half the reason I'm able to deal with 9 p.m., I think half the reason I'm able to manage today so much better is I slept 8.5 hours. And so I was better prepared psychologically to deal with what happened. And maybe I was more relaxed physically, which, is maybe minimized what I'm going to deal with. I'm going to have a sore back for a week. I accept that. But man, it could be a lot worse.
I totally agree. No, and I love that little nugget there that you said that a lot of times it can be what you choose not to do, not just what you are doing. And that, again, there's so much of this in the book and really concrete examples. I think of some of the examples that you give around athletes who are really down in a game and have made major mistakes or errors or things didn't go the way they wanted to, and how they use this neutral thinking to just not think about that, right? Just, hey, I can present the facts. Here's my truth. Where can I go now? And how much bringing your emotions to a level set of neutral empowers you. So folks, you have to read the book. I am not kidding. This info is so great. I have a million more questions, but I can't ask all these questions because it's blowing up right now. I know
we'll do it again.
Okay,
and,
cool.
I encourage people, website thinkbig-gofar.com, Limitless Minds, which I think is kind of cool. Founded by, it's interesting. Do I have a few minutes to kind of explain the company? Is that
you most do? I want you to explain the company. And then after that, if you're willing, we have a zillion questions from the audience and I'll limit it, sure. But let's definitely do questions too, but tell them about the company. They need to hear about it.
Yeah. So Harrison Wilson and DJ Eidson, both were really successful businessmen in the pharmaceutical world. And, DJ was a college basketball player, and Harry, Russell Wilson's older brother, led the nation in punt returns. He was a really good football and baseball player in college. So they had the athletic background, but they were, in sales, largely commission, and in the pharmaceutical world. And they had kind of had this idea, and we're running this podcast called Room Tilters. And then we had all known each other through Russell. And so, we just kind of had a conversation about, could you take some of the things, I guess basically what Harry was saying was, how come the training we're getting in the pharmaceutical world, sales training and business training, isn't the same that my older brother's getting? Now, granted, my older brother's making $36 million a year, but why can't the business world get the same type of training? Nothing wrong with Dale Carnegie, nothing wrong with all the other trainings, but just maybe something more innovative or something more basic. So we had the conversation, and we did a sample test. We talked to Goldman Sachs in Seattle. They put 15 earners, big successful business people whose companies were at 25 million EBITDA or above. And Russell introduced me, and we talked for a couple hours. And they said, this is a really good business model. And Seattle made sense to start. And so really about a year and a half ago, we kind of started taking a B2B element into the business world, coinciding with the book, and a huge build out of scalable digital content, combined with in-person webinars, et cetera, different types of things. We're doing a first group webinar on Friday. Yeah, so it's been fun. I really, when a Kennedy asks you to serve and says you got to go to a bigger audience, I don't know that I'm ready for 150 million people, although I think I'd be fine on Anderson Cooper. I feel like I'm holding my own with JT today. Just the chance that we're impacting people outside of the sports world. And what I love about the business world is there's so many people that want to get better. And I think that that's so cool, because the sports world, we don't share a lot of that. You have to get through so many layers of ego to get to that point, which fortunately I've been able to over the years get to, I think the message has been a lot of fun. So thinkbig-gofar.com. We have some really cool content, and then our website, and then our LinkedIn. I'm at Trevor Moawad, TrevorMoawad, which I'm sure you can post on Instagram. I post a lot of videos that relate to neutral thinking. The book, It Takes What It Takes, is on Audible. It's also at thinkbig-gofar.com/book. It's about $25. So we have, I think, maybe 28,000 people who bought it so far, which has just been incredible for us, considering I have not had a consumer-facing brand because I've been sort of like my head down working in sports. So it's pretty exciting. And then, but I think the most important thing, JT, I would say before answering some questions, I'm often asked, my dad, Bob Moawad, who was one of the original authors of Chicken Soup for the Soul, for those probably above 35 that would know that series, I'm often asked, would he be proud of you? And I think he's proud of all of his kids. But I think the biggest thing my dad would be proud of is that I could be in a car accident and handle it and navigate it and go check on the person that was hit and talk to the police people and thank them and talk to Jimmy, the tow truck driver, and navigate through everything okay. Self-esteem, we can make fun of it on Saturday Night Live. We can joke about it. But self-esteem is the real thing, man. It is how you handle the challenges that life throws in front of you. And life is not going to stop for sports. It's not going to stop for business. It's not going to stop for marriage. In my book, I talk about going through divorce, which was really tough, health challenges, which were really tough, but also going through success, which has its own adversity, but really learning how to enjoy that too. So hopefully, and I'm not really the metaphor, I'm introduced in the book, but Alabama football, Georgia, the military, we use some sports as some great metaphors for people who are Seahawks fans and Alabama fans and Georgia fans, but also just fans of growth, which I can tell you are, JT. So thanks for giving me an opportunity. On LinkedIn, DJ Eidson, at DJ Eidson, at Harrison Wilson. You can follow us and at Limitless Minds.
Well, I know the team is putting all that stuff out there as well. So folks, if you didn't catch all that, don't worry. We're going to put it all out there for you so that you can grab it. And you're right. I mean, even if you're not a sports fan, if you're a self-improvement fan, and if you're somebody who just wants to cope, as you said, like, look what's going on right now. We all need to know how to cope better, and more than cope, how to thrive or just get through it and get better and get stronger. And I think it was interesting. You talked about self-esteem and this idea of, if I'm good, if I'm stronger, I'm in a better position to help everyone else. I can go talk to people and see how they're doing. So wonderful examples. But now we're going to get down to it, people. I promise we're going to answer your questions. So, Trevor, the first question we have, and this is an interesting one. What advice do you have for staying productive and efficient for people who suffer from anxiety disorders?
Yeah. Well, one of the great things for me, if I'm honest, is working in, we just lost this light, Sean, is working in multidisciplinary environments. So I do work with a lot of clinical psychologists, clinical mental health counselors. Yesterday I was on a call with sports and clinical psychologists from the military that know more about how to answer that than me. Look, the truth is anxiety is at its most powerful when we don't know what to expect. The unknown is the ultimate trigger for anxiety. So, those who either suffer from a disorder or are feeling really anxious right now need to first understand that that's a real, honest, and natural feeling right now. And particularly when we're out of our rhythm, we're out of our routine. It's almost like an athlete when you're used to being in a certain place, and now you're on the road, you went to bed at a different time, you're in a different place, you're sitting in a different place. Everything's different. But what doesn't change is what makes you good at what you do. Being a good parent's not going to change right now. Being a good salesperson's not going to change right now. Being a good communicator is not going to change right now. So what I would really do is develop a routine, but try to focus on the core elements that make you good at what you do agnostically.
I love that. It's so true, right? You keep saying, know your truth and what you can control, which makes total sense, dialing in. All right, next question. What is a good neutral position? What to tell myself when my brain goes to panic because we don't know how long it will take to flatten the curve of COVID-19? That's a tough one.
Yeah, I really had a problem with the whole curve thing because it's so different, so many different places. I watched a couple of Governor Cuomo's press conferences, and to me, he kind of felt like Bill Clinton. Like Bill Clinton, every time I watch Bill Clinton, he's such a good talker. And I'm not just saying politically, but just, man, you get sucked in. I could watch Bill Clinton speak for an hour and a half. But what's happening in New York has nothing to do with me. Mm-hmm. So I don't benefit from watching that press conference in Saratoga or upstate New York. So number one, really focus on the information relevant to you right now. So what's your curve in Nebraska? What's your curve in LA? What's your curve to the degree? Because the simple fact of the matter is this. For 3 weeks, we tested 100 people. Now we're testing 60,000 people, 50,000 people a day. If you follow the statistics, they're gonna go up dramatically. What I will say is information that I found incredible that came out about a week ago was that China had got to that apex and was already on the backside, had closed 15 hospitals and was moving forward. And I think if you look at that population and the influx, how close people are, I thought that was incredible. I thought that was powerful. I also noticed a week ago they were giving you a statistic of the thousands of people that had been diagnosed and beat it. It was 84,000, 90,000, 95,000 people. I had a really good friend that works for ABC News that went through it. And then just, had the flu symptoms and came on the other side of it. Well, what I would say is I don't see them giving that statistic anymore. So do you really need to know about the curve? That's the question I would ask you. If you are, I talked to a doctor, a good friend of mine this morning, who said hospitals aren't doing a good job of communicating with nurses right now. They're a little bit nervous. So do I need to know, let me ask you a question, JT. Do I need to know about the curve? Eventually, no, we are going to hit it. Control the things that are within your control right now. Really monitor your external input. really monitor who you're talking to. Try to find information that's relative to you locally. And if you live in Queens, New York, then that's going to be different than New York, Nebraska.
Totally agree with you on that. I love that. It goes back to, again, to the techniques you talk about in the book about the facts that are relevant to you right now versus this extraneous negative stuff that you don't need. And so a part of, I think that the thing that fascinated me about what you're teaching is how good you have to get at discerning what matters to me and what doesn't, right? What's fact and relevant to me and what isn't. And that as we get better at that, we're able to be more neutral. And I think it kind of leads into this next question. Somebody's saying, is it plausible that you can stay in neutral in a longer period of time to properly manage the highs and lows and to almost, I guess, kind of minimize both of them? And they ask a question like Eli Manning. What do you think about that? Is that possible to kind of flatten it both ways and stay more neutral overall?
Yeah, I think some of the people view neutral as this sort of emotionless state. Neutral is really about behavior. So I think you can have a set of behavior that's not going to allow you to sway one way or the other. And I think if you're, watching things that are going to take you emotionally high or low, that could be a negative. So I think you have to be careful about that. I think if you are consuming things, talking to people. So I think one thing that's really important right now is how you balance. I think you can stay in a neutral state by. Hey, Sean, you want to get this out of your screen? I think you can stay on a neutral state by behaving in a neutral way, and I think so that's a great question. I think that you put yourself, like for me, by taking my cues off my blood pressure, then I'm exposing myself to a little bit of this. So by really just staying more calm and flat and just like, all right, what inputs am I going to bring in right now? Obviously, if I feel a certain way, I'll deal with it. But monitoring the things that are going to not allow me to sway. But it took me a week to figure that out. I was like, why am I like all over the place? And then all of a sudden I was like, what inputs do I have now that aren't normal besides this thing that's going on? And I was like, oh, I'm doing this every other day and I'm freaking out about it. And I just need, I need to calm down.
I need to stop. I know. I like that you pointed that out because you're not suggesting that people be so neutral that they have no feeling, right? We want to feel joy. We want to go after goals. You're just talking about how to minimize the negativity because those emotions are so much more powerful. And, if you want to be more successful, more happy. So I love that as an example.
The inputs, JT, like
totally.
Where you're inputting. And sometimes we're going to have to input information and it's going to be negative. Mm-hmm. And so we got to be ready to deal with it.
So true. All right. So shout out to Britt because she's asking a really interesting question. Facebook, we're going there. She said, what do you do about something like Facebook where some of the posts can give you so much joy, but at the same time, plenty of studies show that a lot of the stuff on there makes you sad. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I don't have the psychological stamina for Facebook. I think when I was married, it was okay. But for me, and the people in my business really wanted me to do it and engage with people on it. But for people, I think if I had 3 kids and a perfect wife and I could take that image to the world, every time I go on Facebook, I feel like I don't have the life I want. Really, so not responsible enough to go on it. So we have a business account, but I've only been on Facebook 3 times in my life. And all 3 times were really depressing. So is it a great medium? For sure. I think business-wise for my sports company, Moawad Consulting, I post some information, some different things. But, what I would say is that what I'd say to Britt is, like look at the net gain versus net downside and take a calculated risk if there's a net gain, but otherwise it might be just a behavior modification. Learn to get your news from like I used to get my news primarily from Google News, but Google News right now the first 3 are all coronavirus, and even Twitter right now I follow only sports, and even Twitter. If I go to the main feed that's queued up to mine, it's all this many deaths and all the different types of things, which I can handle. But you have to know yourself, right? Like, I am being honest. Number one, I'm not a huge sports fan. I was an athlete, two-sport athlete in college, and all the elements. Like, I watch HGTV, Netflix, all sorts of elements, all sorts of things. So I'm trying to engage with the things right now that I want to. I'm watching Friday Night Lights, and excited for Ozark, comes out on Friday, and other elements and other things. And then we watched the Batman, the 3 Batman with it, and then he has Zoom calls every what do you let Sean go between the car accident and the light not working back-to-back times. He just put a light on that Poor Alexander Graham Bell would not approve of. It lasted for 30 seconds. But I do think that it really comes down to yourself. Like, my last point with this, JT, would be, because I've worked for so many years in the South, right? 8 years at Alabama, 10 years at Florida State, Northern Florida, South Georgia, 4 years at Georgia, like Jake Owen, Keith Urban, Sam Hunt. I love these guys, right? I love New Country. And New Country is kind of different because it's more uplifting in terms of the chord progressions, but not the words, and I will go head to head even with Garth Brooks. Are there anomalies? Of course. But in general, like, it's really, but at certain times I go to a concert and I love it. I have a blast. If I'm with somebody else, my life is good. Things are great. But if that's not the case for me, I just think it's called psychogenics, which we talk about, JT, in the book. And I use the Korean War as an example. But I think if you're at a place where you could be emotionally weakened relative to what's going on in your life, you need to be really careful about Facebook, different, things, or really only follow people that are going to give you information. I mean, look what it did in the election. People can say what they want, but just the amount of misinformation that was out there. I had people, and I work like top people, that were like, can you believe all that Clinton stuff with the pizza place? And you're like, what? Clinton stuff with the pizza place. But the military, they don't consume their information that way. They go to very specific places that give them the truth. So why should we be any different?
I love it. And I definitely want to wrap up on that note and say my favorite thing that you said in all of that was psychological stamina. And the fact that you're honest about that, folks, so much of the book talks about understanding where you're at, what you're capable of taking in at a time, getting better at that. I think Trevor has repeatedly today said, look, I'm not perfect. I have my high days, my low days, and this is how I battle it. And that's what I want everyone to understand. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be, and I think a lot of people give up on self-improvement and building their mental agility and their mental toolbox because they think they have to be perfect at this stuff. You're a work in progress. That's why we call it work it daily, right? If you just work at it every day, you are going to get better and better, which again is why I love this book, because I think Trevor drives that point home so brilliantly in it. So Trevor, this was awesome. I hope that you're going to want to come back again, especially when your back isn't hurting.
I love the fact people can go on. I try to answer every question on Instagram as best I can. Every answer, I just did Adam Carolla and Tom Bilyeu and some different. There's a great, if you want to, I'm on Tom Bilyeu. If you follow him, and maybe it has 500,000 YouTube downloads. It's only about 25 minutes, but it's pretty interesting. And then for us at Limitless Minds, we're gonna, and I think you'll post this. We'll have a basic webinar called The Fundamentals of Thinking. Look, this is a time, JT, for doing simple better. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're looking for an absence, good and bad can happen at the same time. I feel a lot better about today because I got to talk with you, who have a really good audience that you've earned. Nobody gave you this, JT, that you've earned. I feel a lot better about my day because I did this and what happened at 8:15 in the morning. I'm grateful that I'm through it and that everybody's through it. But now I've moved beyond that. Did it happen? Yes. Do I have a car I can get in and go drive? No. Will I have one later today? Yes. And is it hard to take a deep breath in? Not when I have a big bag of ice on my spot. And so I think my final point is, most people would say, like, are you really making a choice? What other choice is there to make? Like, this is where I think athletes who throw 4 interceptions and are playing horrible 90% of the game, they're not going to concede the final 10%. And so why concede the day at 8:15? But it's easy to be there when you're on the side of the freeway. People are driving by yelling the F word to you because you just slowed everybody down. And then in my mind, I'm like, and I'm glad we didn't, and I'm glad we're here. And, and I didn't know that we'd be able to do it, but everything worked out where we could. And that's great. So excited to connect with the audience. Work it daily. Serena Williams used to always say, the tennis player, for those of you who follow, one of the most special people I know, work plan. I loved it because she'd put a plan in place and she'd work it. And the number one thing she would write down on her list of 5 or 6 things was, Serena, you can do it. And she would remind herself of her capabilities, which is positive. And I'm a big believer in positive thinking, but it doesn't have strength concurrently with negative. It has its best strength in the absence of negativity and in the presence of neutrality.
And that is the perfect way for us to end. So folks, hopefully this convinced you. This is stuff that is totally accessible to you. Trevor is revealing techniques that, again, pro athletes, business executives have been using. There's a reason they use this stuff. It works. And we're only just starting to tap into what we can do. All of us everyday folks can be extraordinary if we want to put the energy in and if we want to learn the technique. So I hope everybody goes and checks it all out. Again, we're going to have all this up for you later on the recording. Trevor, thank you so much. I really appreciate you
doing
this.
JT.
All right.
My best to your family.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. And the next time, remember, if you want to win, you got to work it daily.